Alright, welcome back. We are going to do, one more tonight. We're going to cover Numbers 8 and 9. Both of them are fairly short chapters, and they cover various aspects of, Israelite life, especially as they wander in the wilderness, but also down through the ages. There's some things that we will cover that will affect them kind of forever, for the Israelite forever until the cross. But we'll cover both of those chapters tonight. A little bit more in here. This one might actually be longer than chapter 7, which was 89 verses, just because there's more specific things to cover, more concepts to cover, and then the type-anti-type relationship here that we're going to be hitting on. So, and it's not as much repetition. So let's get started into it. Numbers chapter 8 and verse 1, And Jehovah spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron, and say unto him, When you light the lamps, the 7 lamps shall give light over against the candlestick. And Aaron did so. He lighted the lamps thereof over against the candlestick, as Jehovah commanded Moses. Okay, so they had these lamps in here in the tabernacle so they could see what they were doing. And when they lit them, the lamps were to give light to the they were supposed to light them over by the candlestick. All of the lighting took place over by this the candlestick, the menorah. When they did this, it was so that they could light the menorah next, and that way they would have light to do everything that they needed to do inside of the holy place, where a lot of the priestly things were done on a daily basis. Okay. And so verse 3, And Aaron did so. He lighted the lamps thereof over against the candlestick, as Jehovah commanded Moses. And this work of the candlestick was of beaten gold. Unto the shaft thereof, unto the flowers thereof was beaten work, according unto the pattern which Jehovah had showed Moses. So he made the candlestick. Okay, so now remember, this is kind of a flashback. Number 7 was a flashback. We're still in that flashback, talking about what was to happen at the dedication of the tabernacle, or in the building of the tabernacle. So now we're just getting a little bit more detail. And this is kind of how God works when he presents some things. We see this in Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2. A lot of people want to say, we're talking about 2 different gods, or we're talking about 2 different creation stories, or we're talking about, they try to split it up. Maybe Moses was recording 2 different origin stories when we see Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2. No, that's not what God does. What God does is he gives us a kind of an overview, and then later, maybe way later, he comes back and he has a more detailed version of what happened. So Genesis 1 is the overview of all 7 days, or 6 days, because the 7th day is in chapter 2. And then right after that, he gives a more detailed account of day 6. Well, we've had an Exodus that God commanded Moses how to do the tabernacle, and then Moses commanded the Israelites how to do the tabernacle, and then they built the tabernacle. We got the overview of that. Well, now we're a year later. We're in the 2nd year, which we're about to see. It's going to say that, but Moses is writing down these things about what happened the year before, and we're still in that flashback. And so here he kind of writes a small law about how the lamps inside the most holy place were supposed to be lit near the candlestick, and then how the candlesticks were supposed to be fashioned, or how they were made. And we've seen this before, but he's iterating this in the book of Numbers. Alright, and then verse 5, And Jehovah spoke unto Moses, saying, Take the Levites from among the children of Israel, and cleanse them. And thus shalt thou do unto them to cleanse them, sprinkle water of purifying upon them, and let them shave all their flesh, and let them wash their clothes, and so make themselves clean. Now, understand, types are not always, in fact, hardly ever are they of the same exact form. And I'll give you an example of this. The flood was a type of New Testament baptism. The washings of Naaman were a type of the New Testament baptism. Each of those types covers an aspect or tries to teach us one thing about the antitype that it's pointing to. So what does the flood teach us? The flood teaches us that in the water, sin is destroyed, and the person is saved. Okay, so and we see this in 1 Peter 3:20 and 21, that it's the water because of God's command, because of God's participation. It says by the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the water is destructive of sin, but it saves the man. Here we're reading about a type, and yes, it's not immersion. It is not about the full plunging in or the burial that New Testament baptism must be, because that's not the point. The point here is as a type that this sprinkling or purifying or cleansing was a ritualistic type to point to a reality that is the antitype. That this sprinkling here with water, and water is the key part of this, was to cleanse and to purify. Well, what does baptism do? Baptism brings us into contact with the blood of Christ, which cleanses us and purifies us. But note that there are parts of this purification process that we don't do. Why? Because the specific actions aren't the type. The idea is the water and the purifying and the cleansing are the type, because they had to shave all their flesh, they had to wash all of their clothes, and they had to make themselves clean. There was an outward physical aspect to this purifying or cleansing ritual. That's why in 1 Peter 3:21, when Peter says that there is an antitype that doth also now save us, that it is not the cleansing of the filth of the flesh. He has to say that it's an antitype. It wasn't like this ritualistic cleansing of the body that the Israelites went to. That he's saying that this is that the New Testament baptism is the antitype, and so you're not purifying your body, you're not cleansing yourself. It's not just a ritualistic outward thing like what the Israelites did. He says that baptism doth also now save you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so there is a real true power, a sanctifying, purifying, cleansing power that God has imbued into the act of baptism that wasn't available to the Israelites. And that's why it's so important to understand the difference between type and antitype. When you talk about the type is always limited. It's only teaching one thing about the antitype that it points to. In this case, it's the water and its relationship to the cleansing and purifying. But for us, it's the cleansing and purifying of the soul, not the cleansing of the filth of the flesh. In Numbers chapter 8, verse 7, it's a ritualistic cleansing and purifying of the filth of the flesh to wash their clothes. The clothes don't have any spiritual aspect. But again, the idea here is us washing our robes, our spiritual robes, in the blood of Christ, and them coming out white. We don those robes of white. I have an article on my website called "The Robes of White: God's Dress Code," and it's about the washing of our robes in the blood of Christ. Think about blood. Blood stains, right? Blood, typically, if you spill blood on something white, it's probably ruined. But with the blood of Christ is purifying. And the only place you can contact that is in the watery grave of baptism. It's the burial into his death, according to Romans chapter 6. So this is very, very important to understand what's actually taking place here. But God is saying, I want you to separate out the Levites from among the children of Israel, cleanse them through this ritualistic practice that is a type pointing to a New Testament antitype, which is not just a ritual to show what has already happened, but is actually what saves them. what actually purifies them and cleanses them. And part of that comes from understanding that here in Numbers, when they had the water sprinkled on them or poured on them, however, whatever translation you're using, they were actually washing themselves. They were actually washing their clothes, and they were actually making themselves clean in a very physical, real sense, as a sign or as a pointer to what really happens spiritually under the New Testament. And I don't know if I can make that any more clear, but the distinction here is Old Testament physical type pointing to New Testament spiritual antitype. And it's not just, baptism is not just an outward sign that you've already been saved. It's actually the point that you are saved, cleansed, purified. And that's the strength of this type here, is pointing that out. All right. Then let them take a young bullock with his meat offering, even fine flour mingled with oil, and another young bullock shalt you take for a sin offering. Thou shalt bring the Levites before the tabernacle of the congregation, and thou shalt gather the whole assembly of the children of Israel together, all 2 million people. And you shall bring the Levites before Jehovah, and the children of Israel shall put their hands upon the Levites. This is a very significant symbol. This idea of placing your hands. The placing of hands signifies a transfer of some kind is going on here. Now remember, and he's going to talk about it, God required, because of what he had done to bring them out of Egypt, remember he took the life of all the firstborn of the Egyptians, he required the firstborn of everything, including all of the humans, be given over to him, sacrificed to him for their whole history. All the firstborn of every tribe, of every animal, everything, all of it belonged to God. What they are doing here by placing their hands on the Levites is they are transferring that responsibility to the Levites. And so instead of the firstborn of the Levites, all of the Levites, instead of the firstborn of each of the tribes, the other tribes, they were going to be the Levites. So the Levites were representative of the firstborn. And we're going to talk about the word sacrifice. Sacrifice is very important here because of things that happen later. People freak out because of God's an evil God because this or whatever. So we'll talk about that. But also in thinking about the type antitype, and of course all of this points to Christ, we have in a sense, or Jesus has done this. Jesus transferred from us to himself the sacrifice of himself. He bore as that sacrifice. That was the firstborn. Jesus was the firstborn of God. And what did God say? This is my beloved Son. And he says, this day have I begotten thee. Well, when does God say that? When does God say to Jesus that he was the first, or that he, this day have I begotten thee? Because Jesus is God. Jesus has always been God. Eternally, he is God. And so he isn't a created being. So what does it mean that Jesus is the firstborn, that Jesus is begotten of God? Well, it's in Acts 13. Let me search for it. I should have another one of those. Okay, so look at this verse, Acts 13:33. God hath fulfilled the same unto us, their children, in that he hath raised up Jesus again. So we're talking about the resurrection. God has raised up Jesus again, as it is also written in the 2nd Psalm. So you could read Psalm 2 and you see this prophecy. Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. When did God begat Jesus as the firstborn? When he resurrected him from the dead. Jesus is the firstborn of the dead. Now, follow me here. Follow me. Jesus is the firstborn resurrected from the dead, to die no more. He's not the first person ever resurrected, but he is the first one ever resurrected to never die again. He is also high priest. When we look back to Numbers here and we're talking about the transference of the firstborn obligation to the Levites, we see Jesus does the same thing. He transfers to himself the obligation in order to become the stand-in, the required offering to God that is demanded, and he becomes the firstborn by doing so. He also is the high priest by doing so. He becomes the new priesthood, or the new high priest, the leader of the priesthood, of which all Christians are a part of. And on top of that, when we talk about being begotten, we're talking about birth. Jesus was raised up. He was, in this sense, physically born again. When we die to ourselves, when we are immersed in water, Romans chapter 6, we die and we raise up. Because there's a connection there in Romans chapter 6, is that like as Christ was buried and rose again, we die to ourselves and are buried with him in baptism, contact the blood of Christ, made into a new creature, and we are reborn spiritually. That's what John 3 is about. John 3 and 5. Jesus says to enter into the kingdom, you have to be reborn. And not just going back, and you're not talking about a physical rebirth where you go back into your mother's womb. That's what Nicodemus was like. What? I'm a grown man. How can I do that? Jesus is talking about spiritual rebirth. That when we die to ourselves, when we are immersed in water, we are dying as Christ died. And then, this day have I begotten thee. When Jesus rose from the dead, we too have that power to be resurrected with him, spiritually speaking, when we come up out of that watery grave of baptism. And so when we come up out of the watery grave of baptism, what does God say to us? This day have I begotten thee. We are adopted. Of course, Jesus is considered begotten in the sense of that he is, that things are a little bit different. Jesus is an actual son. We might think of it's not really biological because of the nature of God, but Jesus is a true son of God, whereas we are adopted children. But essentially when we come up out of the waters, that's what God's doing. He's adding us to the church. But you got to come up out of the water. Jesus is the firstborn among many brethren. When do we become part of the family of God? It's when we come up out of that watery grave of baptism. That's when we are resurrected spiritually. And it all ties in together. You can't get away from the importance and the power of baptism. And again, as I've said it many times, H2O has no power. Two molecules of hydrogen and one molecule of oxygen bound together chemically does nothing. But we're not talking about dunked in water. We're not talking about going swimming or taking a bath. We are talking about New Testament immersion according to God's command. It is an act of obedient faith. And it's the act of obedient faith that is in the water where we are transformed. And then as Christ was raised up and God said, this day have I begotten thee, that he became the firstborn of many, that we rise up and we become part of God's family. There are too many people who deny the purpose and the power of baptism. They think it's all on them. They think it's all in the faith. Faith is something that you do. Faith is in your mind and in your heart. It's your acknowledgement of the truth of God's plea with you to turn to him. You're saying, okay, God, I hear you. I believe what you're saying. And you may even confess with your mouth and repent of your sins, turn away from your sins. But until you submit, baptism is the most passive of all the things that we do to be saved. It is the point of salvation. But when you submit to that death, burial, and resurrection in the water, it's then that God adds you to the church. You are immersed into Christ. You can't believe into Christ. You can't confess into Christ. You can't repent into Christ. You are immersed into Christ. And this is from passages like Numbers 8, where we talk about the dedication of the Levites, where we talk about the transference of the responsibility of the firstborn. Okay, so back to Numbers 8. So the children of Israel will put their hands upon the Levites, and Aaron shall offer the Levites before Jehovah for an offering. So what is Aaron doing? Aaron shall offer the Levites before Jehovah for an offering of the children of Israel. So Aaron's going to offer the Levites as an offering. So does that mean he gets all of the Levites, puts them up on the altar, and burns them as a sacrifice? No, of course not. That's silly. When Aaron offers the Levites before Jehovah as an offering, he's presenting them to Jehovah for his purpose, that they may execute the service of Jehovah. Anytime a human is said to be offered to God, if it's according with God's will, they are never going to be offered as a sacrifice that is burnt on the altar. If that is done, it is always done in a representative fashion, just like it's done here. See, you're going to have the Israelites transfer their responsibility to the Levites, and then watch what happens. And the Levites shall lay their hands upon the heads of the bullocks. See, there's that transference again. And thou shalt offer one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering unto Jehovah, to make an atonement for the Levites. So the responsibility of the firstborn transfers to the Levites, and then the Levites transfer the responsibility of actually being sacrificed on the altar, because God doesn't like human sacrifice. It's abhorrent to him. He hates it. So he transfers the responsibility of that to the bullocks by the Levites placing their hand. And of course, it's ceremonial, it's ritualistic, but that's essentially what God is saying. Is I don't want human sacrifice. I'm different than all of the other gods. We'll go all the way back to Abraham and Isaac. Okay, Abraham saw all the other gods around. That's what they were doing. That's what they continued to do. Baal, Moloch, all of them still do. There are people who worship those gods even today. God said, Abraham, offer your son, Isaac. And what God was doing was proving to Abraham how much faith Abraham had. God knew, but Abraham needed to know. And instead of letting Abraham actually sacrifice Isaac, he transferred that responsibility to the ram. He provided a ram instead, just like what we're seeing here. Okay? Verse 13, and you shall set the Levites before Aaron and before his sons, and offer them for an offering unto the Lord, or unto Jehovah. Okay, so you shall set the Levites, here we're talking about the Levites, the people, before Aaron and before his sons, and offer them for an offering unto Jehovah. They're not burning the Levites on the altar, but they are offering them before Jehovah. They're dedicating them to the service of the tabernacle. Thus shalt thou separate the Levites from among the children of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. Very, very important that we understand this, because there's going to come some stories when we get into the book of Judges where people do hasty vows. Just they feel passionate and they make stupid statements, and this is going to come into play, and I'm going to come right back to this. My eyes are super dry. My apologies. Alright, anyway. I guess I should get some eye drops or something. My wife does that all the time. But anyway, the vows that are made God understands and gives a way out, and we're seeing the basis for that here. Verse 15, and after that shall the Levites go in to do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, and you shall cleanse them and offer them for an offering. It says that over and over and over again. Nobody's talking about burning people on an altar. For they are wholly given unto me from among the children of Israel. Instead of such as open every womb, even instead of the firstborn of all the children of Israel, have I taken them unto me. That was a requirement. For all the firstborn of the children of Israel are mine, both man and beast. On the day that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified them for myself. Okay, by freeing them, by destroying the sinful, by destroying the wicked, he sanctified the righteous. He sanctified Israel by destroying Egypt. Now, this is important because Egypt is a type. Egypt becomes a type of Israel. When we get to the New Testament, the city that is spiritually compared to Egypt is Jerusalem. And we're going to see a juxtaposition here of Israel being wicked and the Christians being the New Jerusalem. And they're the ones that are being sanctified. Okay, so this is not an isolated thing that God is talking about. This is central to so many things here, including Christ being the firstborn. All the firstborn of children of Israel are mine, both man and beast. On the day that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified the firstborn of Israel for myself. And I have taken the Levites for instead of all the firstborn of the children of Israel. So he does an exchange. He says, instead of taking all the firstborn, I'm going to leave those with their tribes, and instead I'm just going to take the whole tribe of Levi instead. They're going to transfer that responsibility to them. And I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron and to his sons, that's the priesthood, from among the children of Israel, to do the service of the children of Israel in the tabernacle of the congregation, and to make an atonement for the children of Israel. So they're going to serve. The Levites are all about serving the tabernacle, the day-to-day operations, the cleaning of it, the mopping the floors, whatever, anything that physically needed to be done. The Levites were required to do it instead of the firstborn from each of the tribes, and they had to be purified, and they had to be for an atonement, that there be no plague. What is that word plague dealing with? Going back to Egypt, so that there be no plague. If they didn't do this right, what's going to happen? There's going to be plagues. Well, where do we read about these plagues coming on the Israelites? Book of Revelation. Book of Revelation talks about the plagues that were poured out on Jerusalem, and how Jerusalem and Judah had become like Egypt of old in their persecution of the Christians, the way that the Egyptians persecuted the Jews, in their worship of false idols, like you name it, they were just like Egypt. And the whole thing had come full circle. And it's powerful and amazing how this all ties together. That there be no plague among the children of Israel when the children of Israel come nigh unto the sanctuary. Okay? And Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel did to the Levites according unto all that Jehovah commanded Moses concerning the Levites. So did the children of Israel unto them. So they did all the things we just read about. And the Levites were purified, and they washed their clothes. And Aaron offered them as an offering before Jehovah, not burnt on the altar, but dedicated to the service of the tabernacle. And Aaron made an atonement for them to cleanse them. And after that went the Levites in to do their service in the tabernacle of the congregation before Aaron and before his sons, as Jehovah had commanded Moses concerning the Levites, so did they unto them. Now remember, these Levites, they're the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and the Merari people. Okay, those are all Levites. Those are the three sons of Levi that we read about. And so each of those three sons, they're divided out to do specific things with regard to the breaking down and the carrying of the tabernacle when they moved, and then the setting it back up when they got there under the instruction of the priesthood. Okay, but they also tended to the daily needs of the priests in the tabernacle. Okay. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, This is that belongeth unto the Levites. From 25 old and upward they shall go in to wait upon the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. So starting at 25, and from the age of 50 years they shall cease waiting upon the service thereof, and shall serve no more. So from 25 to 50, the Levites were required to be at the tabernacle. And notice it doesn't say men here. This is men and women. So from 25 to 50, they served, waited upon the priest, did whatever was needed at the tabernacle of the priest, for the priests. Okay, but shall minister with their brethren in the tabernacle, brethren being kinfolk. That's not a male term, but shall minister with their brethren in the tabernacle of the congregation to keep the charge, and shall do no service. Thus shalt thou do unto the Levites touching their charge. Okay, so after they turn 50, they don't have a charge. They're freed from that. So they spend 25 years of their life. First 25 years, they're kids essentially. They are growing up. They're learning or whatever. 25. They go serve in the temple, or the tabernacle of the temple. And for the next 25 years, that's what they're supposed to do. Doesn't mean that takes up every aspect of their life. They still had their normal everyday lives with their families and whatever, and had their responsibilities as fathers and mothers and whatnot. But their job, their work, was seeing to the tabernacle. And then after they turned 50, they weren't required to do it anymore, but they could minister if they wished. They shall minister with their brethren in the tabernacle of the congregation to keep the charge, but shall do no service. They didn't have to do anything. Okay, so that is chapter 8. So let's get into chapter 9 then. And Jehovah spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year. So now we're done with a flashback. Okay, so Moses wrote in this time period. He starts the book of Numbers. He's writing this chapter 7. And I think it was even before. No, it was chapter 7. Chapter 7 and chapter 8 is a flashback to when they first put the tabernacle together, and they were first dedicating it. All right, so now we're done. Moses is bringing us back to the present. And Jehovah spake unto Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the first month of the second year, after they were come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Let the children of Israel also keep the Passover at his appointed season. Because remember, they're coming out. And then the Passover is supposed to be in the first month. That's what started their year, was the coming out of Egypt. That started everything for them. They were made into a new nation. And so on the 14th day of the month. So let the children of Israel also keep the Passover at his appointed season. And the 14th day of this month at even you shall keep it in his appointed season, according to all the rites of it, and according to all the ceremonies thereof shall you keep it. Okay? So they've come around. It's been a year. Remember, they kept the Passover. The first Passover was kept in Egypt. It's very, very interesting and very, very important, because the first Lord's Supper is had before the cross. It's had, if you will, in Egypt by the Jews or by the men who were Jews, including Christ. But then after the cross, the nation is established, and you have the continual keeping of it after that. Same thing here. After that first year, it says you keep it on the 14th day of the month every year after that. All right, so they're not in Egypt anymore. And it says and Moses spake unto the children of Israel that they should keep the Passover, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month at even in the wilderness of Sinai, according to all that Jehovah commanded Moses. So did the children of Israel. So they've been here for a year at the bottom of this mountain, and they're keeping their second Passover there at Sinai. And there were certain men who were defiled by the dead body of a man, that they could not keep the Passover on that day. And they came before Moses and before Aaron on that day. And those men said unto him, We are defiled by the dead body of a man. Wherefore are we kept back, that we may not offer an offering of Jehovah in his appointed season among the children of Israel? So these guys have a problem. Remember, if you touch a dead body, you're considered unclean. And you're not allowed to come to the tabernacle and present sacrifices or anything like that. You have to consider yourself unclean until, usually until even, or you had to go through ritualistic washings and offer sacrifices and all that. like we read in the book of Leviticus. And so these guys come to Moses and Aaron and say, like, we want to keep the Passover. We heard your reminder. We know that that's God's command. We want to do it, but we feel like we're caught in a catch-22 here because we're unclean and we're not allowed to. And so they say, what do we do? And so Moses, verse 8, Moses said unto them, stand still, don't go anywhere, and I will hear what Jehovah will command concerning you. And Jehovah spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if any man of you or of your posterity, and that means all the way down your children, your children's children, and so on, shall be unclean by reason of a dead body, or be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover unto Jehovah. Okay, so no matter what, God says you will keep the Passover. The 14th day of the second month, at even they shall keep it. So when are they going to keep it? They keep it the next month, because it's supposed to be the 14th day of the first month. But if they can't, if extenuating circumstances prevent them from doing it, because go back up here. Okay, on the 14th day of this month, is the first month of the second year. On the 14th day of this month, so it's supposed to be the 14th day of the first month. But what does God say? If you can't, because of dead body, journey far off, or whatever reason, you will keep the Passover, but you will keep it on the 14th day of the second month at even. They shall keep it and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. So they're going to keep it the same way they're supposed to. You shall leave none of it until the morning, nor break any bone of it. According to all the ordinances of the Passover, they shall keep it. So they're going to do it just like they were supposed to, but they do it a month later. All right, so these guys are like, okay, good. So for whatever reason, it just happened to be that we touched a dead body and it was going to make us unclean when we were supposed to partake of the Passover. We want to do what God says, but we can't do what God says because it conflicts with another law. God gives them a way out. Now, God turns the tables, but the man that is clean and is not in a journey, in other words, he doesn't have an excuse or a reason, but forbears to keep the Passover, even the same soul shall be cut off from among his people, because he brought not the offering of Jehovah in his appointed season, that man shall bear his sin. So if somebody just doesn't do it, because they just don't, then that person is cut off. But if a person wants to, and another of God's laws or circumstances, maybe he's in prison, and he's just not able to, for whatever reason, God says, all right, if you can't do it when you're supposed to, then I understand. Do it the second month. Okay? But if you just skip it because you just want to skip it, and we can apply a similar idea here to our own worship. We're supposed to meet every first day of the week. We assemble together for the purpose of partaking of the Lord's Supper every first day of the week. And if you have extenuating circumstances, God understands. Do it the next time. Okay? We have a lot of congregations who will take the Lord's Supper to the shut-ins, the people who just physically can't do it because of illness or age, and that's a great thing. But if somebody is out traveling and there just doesn't happen to be a congregation around, you're supposed to partake of it with other Christians. But I remember when my family, when I was young, we would go on trips. We would go to Colorado to go skiing or something. Dad would make sure to bring the Lord's Supper materials. We would have unleavened bread and fruit of the vine, grape juice, for the trip. And we would stop and we would have a small worship service and do what we were supposed to do. But if there are extenuating circumstances and you just can't make it, you can't do it, this shows that God does understand. What is the purpose of the Old Testament? The Old Testament is supposed to teach us about the nature of God. And so if you were just skipping to skip, this is what God says. But if you can't and you want to be there and you want to participate, God is a loving and gracious and merciful God, and He understands. And that's not me making that up. That's not me reading this into the scripture. This is what this is about. This is exactly what this passage is teaching us about the nature of God. And so this is this is a doctrine that I think that is, at least in principle, taught in the Old Testament, and something that is of the nature of God, and so it's also going to apply in principle in the New Testament. All right. Verse 14. If a stranger shall sojourn among you. So remember, strangers are foreigners. Well, we would use the word foreigner here. And this idea of sojourn among you is, it's not that they're just traveling through, they happen to pass by or whatever, and it's Passover. No, this is a stranger or foreigner who decides to travel with them and kind of become part of them. They like this Israelite thing. They understand what's going on, and they're like, hey, I want to be a part of that. And so they sojourn among you, and they're kind of becoming Israelites. We might call them proselytes or something along those. And this foreigner wants to keep the Passover. Okay, God says okay. He wants to keep the Passover unto Jehovah according to the ordinances of the Passover and according to the manner thereof. So shall he do. God says that's perfectly great. Ye shall have one ordinance, both for the foreigner and for him that was born in the land. Everybody does it the same way. And if the sojourner is unclean, still wants to keep the Passover, then he can do it in the second month. Same ordinance as everybody else. Because that's what this sojourner among you is, essentially somebody who's becoming a proselyte. And on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, okay, so we're going to shift gears here. So that's the kind of the deal part with the Passover, and hey, if I can't make it on the first month, I can do it on the second if I really, really want to take of it, and I'm not just skipping. So now we're going to talk about travel plans here, and we're almost done. It says, on the day that the tabernacle was reared up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, namely the tent of the testimony. And this is where we get back into calling it kind of the proper name, the tent of the testimony, as opposed to the tent that Moses was out kind of away from everybody there at the first, to get messages from God. Once they erected the tent of the testimony, once they erected the tabernacle, Moses eventually brought that tent that he was getting all of his messages from back into the camp right there on the east side, where the opening of the tabernacle was for people to enter. Okay, so anyway, there was a cloud that covered the tabernacle, same cloud that had protected them, followed them all the way out of Egypt, covered them as they crossed the Red Sea. This, of course, is a representative presence of the theophany, the God the Son. We eventually refer to him as Jesus when he incarnates, when he becomes a man. But this is pre-incarnate Jesus. This is God the Son before he becomes a man. And so at evening, there was upon the tabernacle, as it was, the appearance of fire until the morning. So during the daytime, there was a cloud sitting there over the tent, just kind of hovering above it. And then at nighttime, it was fire, provided light for the whole camp. All right, there's a symbol there. Jesus providing light for the whole world. And so this is kind of the standard thing. There's the cloud by day and the fire by night for the whole time they're in the wilderness. So it was always. The cloud covered it by day and the appearance of fire by night. And when the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, then after that the children of Israel journeyed. So if they get up and they don't see the cloud is going to lead them through the wilderness. And so they would follow it. They would know, hey, there's no cloud over the tabernacle, time to pack up and go. And then they would follow the cloud and the pillar of fire by night. Okay, so then after that the children of Israel journeyed, and in the place where the cloud abode, there the children of Israel would pitch their tents. And the cloud would go find a spot, and then would hover there, and that's where they would set up the tabernacle, and then the whole camp would set up according to what we read earlier in the book of Numbers. And the commandment of Jehovah, at the commandment of Jehovah, the children of Israel journeyed, and at the commandment of Jehovah they pitched. As long as the cloud abode upon the tabernacle, they rested in their tents. So this is kind of getting repetitive here, but it's really explaining what's happening. That the cloud determined when they moved and when they stayed. And when the cloud tarried long upon the tabernacle, many days, then the children of Israel kept the charge of Jehovah and journeyed not. They stayed there. I mean, where are they going to go? God had promised that he would go with them to the promised land. Well, that cloud, that pillar of fire, is God with them right over the tabernacle. And so, if they decided to, hey, you know what? I know the cloud hasn't gone anywhere, but we're going to pack up and go anyway. What would that have accomplished? They would have been leaving. They would have been leaving God. But instead, they followed all the days that they were wandering. So it was when the cloud was a few days upon the tabernacle, according to the commandment of Jehovah, they abode in their tents, and according to the commandment of Jehovah they journeyed. And so it was when the cloud abode from even unto the morning, and that the cloud was taken up in the morning, they journeyed. So in other words, if they stayed just a day, they stayed just a day. Whether it was by day or by night, the cloud was taken up, they journeyed. Or whether it were 2 days or a month or a year. So this is really getting specific. If the cloud hovered in a place for 1 day, they set up the tabernacle, they were there, and the next morning the cloud was gone, they broke it all back down and they headed back out. If it was there for 2 days, then they did it. If it was there for a month or a whole year, whatever, the cloud directed when they would be walking and when they would be camping. Okay, so that the cloud tarried upon the tabernacle, remaining thereon, the children of Israel abode in their tents and journeyed not. But when it was taken up, they journeyed. At the commandment of Jehovah they rested in the tents, and at the commandment of Jehovah they journeyed. They kept the charge of Jehovah at the commandments of Jehovah by the hand of Moses. They basically did exactly what God asked them to do in terms of breaking camp and setting up camp. So an interesting set of chapters here, in my opinion. A little bit more interesting than Numbers chapter 7. Less content in terms of verses. We only had 40-something verses compared to 89, but there was a little bit more packed into it, and my virus protection is deciding to show up there, so sorry about that. But the chapters were very, very interesting for me, and I especially love the type-anti-type comparison that we get to make in these chapters, and I hope you have found that there is real connection here to what we have been taught all our lives in the New Testament, but haven't really studied much in the Old Testament. And I hope it really strengthens and helps you understand what God has been trying to get across. When he says a thing, he means a thing. And so when he says that baptism saves you, he means that. When he says that Jesus is the firstborn, and it was at his resurrection, and he ties that into our spiritual resurrection, that means something. And when we see the Levites getting transferred to them the responsibilities of the firstborn, do we understand the requirement that God has that we are all his and should be offered to him for our sins? But instead we transferred that to Christ, and Christ bore our sins on the cross. Because this all points to Jesus. Every single bit of this points to Jesus and what he did for us and what he continues to do for us. He serves as the high priest in that capacity even now, and it's up to eternity. He is our mediator between us now and God in heaven, the Father. And it's just amazing and powerful, this message that was 1,500 years before Jesus ever came on the scene. So anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like these videos, share them, subscribe to the channel, get notifications when new videos come up. Leave comments. I love interacting with anyone who wants to discuss these things. If you have questions, maybe you disagree about something, that's fine. Let's talk it out. Let's reason from the scriptures. So appreciate you watching, and we will see you guys next time.